I'm Lieutenant Colonel Lana Hale, 41 years old, former Air Force intelligence, call sign Valkyrie. For over a decade, I led a classified team that didn't officially exist, Unit 777, through missions buried so deep they vanished from the record. I gave everything to that uniform, to the people I commanded. But when a single political decision erased my entire unit and labeled our success inconvenient, I disappeared with it. 2 years of silence. 2 years of pretending I was nobody. Have you ever been dismissed or humiliated by the very system you built your life around? If so, you'll understand what I did next. Before I tell you what happened at that gate, where 2 young guards laughed at my expired ID right before access override, Unit 777 lit up their terminal. Let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your worth after being written off, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about standing your ground. What happened next might surprise you. The ID card felt wrong in my hand, too light, too faded. I'd carried it for 7 years overseas, through sand and ash and places that don't exist on any map you can Google. Now, standing at the gate of Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs, it looked like something I'd fished out of a junk drawer. The guard was maybe 20. Airman First Class Decker, according to his name tape. His partner, Moreno, leaned against the booth with the practiced boredom of someone who'd checked 1,000 IDs that week and expected 1,000 more. Decker took my card, held it up to the light like he was inspecting a counterfeit 20. "Ma'am, this expired in 2018. "I'm aware," I said. "You retired or something?" I kept my voice level. "Or something." Moreno wandered over, hands in his pockets. "Probably a tourist. They get lost sometimes, think they can just drive onto base." I didn't correct them. I'd learned a long time ago that silence does more work than explanations. Let people fill in the blanks themselves, they usually get it wrong, and that tells you everything you need to know about them. Decker swiped the card through the reader. I watched his face. He was expecting a red X, maybe a polite error message telling him to direct me to the visitor center. The monitor flickered. Then it went red. Not error red. Alert red. Access override. Unit 777 authorized. The text burned across the screen in capital letters, pulsing like a heartbeat. Below it, clearance codes I knew he'd never seen before scrolled past faster than he could read them. Both airmen went still. Decker looked at the screen. Looked at me. Looked back at the screen like it might change if he stared hard enough. "Ma'am." His voice had gone quiet. "Is it really you?" I didn't smile. I didn't need to. "Open the gate, airman." He snapped to attention so fast I heard his boots click. Moreno fumbled with the controls, and the barrier lifted with a mechanical hiss that sounded like an apology. I drove through without looking back. The base hadn't changed much. Same flat Colorado sprawl, same mountains cutting sharp lines against the western sky. Same grid of identical buildings painted in shades of bureaucratic beige. I passed the commissary, the chapel, the neat rows of base housing where families lived their neat, normal lives. None of them knew what Unit 777 was. That was the point. I parked outside the operations building and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. The ID card lay on the passenger seat, still glowing faintly in my peripheral vision. I wondered if Decker had already called it in. Probably. That kind of override doesn't pop up without triggering alerts all the way up the chain. Good. Let them know I was here. The thing about being erased is that it happens in stages. First, they pull your credentials. Then your access. Then your records get shuffled into compartments so deep that even people with clearances can't find them. Finally, they reassign everyone who served with you, scatter them across different commands, different continents, different wars. And you become a ghost. Not dead, that would be simpler. Just absent. A blank space where a career used to be. When people ask what happened to you, the answer is always the same. Classified. Need to know. Above your pay grade. Eventually, people stop asking. I'd spent 2 years in that limbo. 2 years watching my phone not ring, checking email accounts that delivered nothing but spam, calling numbers that went to voicemail boxes that were perpetually full. The Pentagon didn't return my calls. My former CO, a man I'd bled beside in 3 different theaters, sent exactly one message: "We'll handle the narrative." Then nothing. The Air Force trains you for a lot of things: survival, evasion, resistance, escape. How to operate behind enemy lines. How to compartmentalize trauma. How to lead people into situations where some of them won't come back. They don't train you for what happens when the institution itself becomes the enemy. When the same system that gave you purpose and identity decides you're inconvenient. When the mission you ran successfully gets buried because acknowledging it would raise questions nobody wants to answer. I got out of the car. The Colorado sun was bright and clean, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper than it really is. I straightened my jacket, civilian clothes, nothing that would mark me as military, and walked toward the building. A staff sergeant held the door for me, didn't make eye contact. Inside, the hallways smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. I knew where I was going. The briefing room was on the 3rd floor, East Wing, same place it had always been. I took the stairs. Elevators are for people in a hurry, and I wanted to feel the building around me. Wanted to remember what it was like to move through these spaces with authority, when my uniform meant something and my presence changed the temperature of a room. On the 2nd floor landing, I passed a group of junior officers. They glanced at me, then away. I was nobody to them. Just another contractor, maybe, or someone's wife visiting for lunch. I didn't exist. The briefing room door was closed. I could hear voices inside, the low murmur of a meeting in progress. I checked my watch. 1,430 hours. Right on time. I opened the door without knocking. The room went silent. 8 people around the table, all in uniform. Maps on the wall, laptops open, coffee cups leaving rings on folders marked secret. And at the head of the table, Colonel Brenner. He looked up, irritated. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is a classified briefing. If you need directions, I'm exactly where I need to be," I said. I walked to the empty seat halfway down the table and sat. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were waiting for Brenner to throw me out, and he was clearly considering it. "I don't know who you are," he said slowly, "but you need to leave. Now." I pulled out my ID card and slid it across the table. It stopped in front of a major I didn't recognize, young, maybe 30, with the kind of fresh-faced confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important. "Run it," I said. The major hesitated. Brenner nodded, jaw tight. The major picked up the card, walked to the security terminal by the door. He swiped it through. The screen flashed red. "Active authorization, Valkyrie, Unit 777. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. I met Brenner's eyes and didn't blink. "Now," I said quietly, "let's talk about why your intelligence reports are 2 years out of date." 2 years earlier, I'd stood in a different briefing room. Same kind of maps on the walls, same classified folders, different faces. That one had been in Virginia, in a building that doesn't have a name, on a hallway that doesn't officially exist. General Marcus Levin had been at the head of that table. "The mission's compromised," he'd said. No preamble, no explanation. Just 5 words that unraveled everything. We'd been running a joint task operation out of a location I still can't name. Unit 777 was technically Air Force, but we pulled from everywhere: Rangers, SEALs, Marine Recon, anyone with the clearances and the skill set. 14 people total. We'd been operational for 3 years, running deep cover reconnaissance in regions where U.S. military presence was diplomatically complicated. Translation: we weren't supposed to be there. The job was simple in concept, impossible in execution. We gathered intelligence, verified targets, coordinated strikes that would later be attributed to local forces or left unexplained entirely. We were the eyes and ears for operations that couldn't be acknowledged. And we were good at it. Until we weren't. The details are still classified, but the shape of it is simple enough. Someone talked. Someone always talks. A source we'd cultivated for 18 months turned out to be playing both sides, feeding us real intelligence mixed with just enough fiction to walk us into a trap. 3 of my people didn't come home. Captain Rafe Kellen, my operations XO, the man I trusted to read a situation as well as I could, took shrapnel in his leg and shoulder, pulling the others out. We extracted under fire, left equipment behind, burned safe houses we'd spent months establishing. The mission was a tactical failure. More importantly, it was a political disaster. Because we weren't supposed to be there. And when you're not supposed to be somewhere, you can't exactly file an after-action report explaining what went wrong. So they buried it. Not the mission, the entire unit. I'd expected a debrief. Maybe an investigation. At minimum, a conversation about what happened and how to prevent it next time. What I got was a phone call from General Levin's aide telling me to report to an office in the Pentagon that turned out to be a repurposed storage room. Levin himself showed up 20 minutes late. "Major Hale," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I want you to know this isn't personal." That's how I knew it was over. He talked for 10 minutes. I remember fragments: operational security, congressional oversight, need for compartmentalization. He used phrases like strategic reorganization and temporary administrative hold that meant absolutely nothing and everything. The core message was clear: Unit 777 never existed. The mission never happened. The people who died never served under my command. "We'll handle the narrative," Levin said. I asked about my people. The ones who'd made it back. Kellen, with his leg still in a brace. Sergeant Rowe, who'd spent 4 days in a safe house with a concussion, waiting for extraction. Major Sloan, who'd run communications from a forward position for 36 hours straight. "They're being reassigned," Levin said. "Different commands. It's better that way." "Better for who?" He stood up then, smoothed his uniform. "You'll receive orders within the week. In the meantime, your security clearances are suspended pending review." "What review?" "The one that determines whether maintaining your clearances poses a risk to ongoing operations." I understood then. There would be no review. Or rather, the review had already happened, and I'd already lost. "You're cutting me loose," I said. "I'm protecting the institution," he replied. "Sometimes that requires difficult decisions." He left. I sat in that storage room for another hour, staring at boxes of obsolete tactical manuals, trying to process what had just happened. They gave me a week. 7 days to turn in my credentials, my access badges, my classified materials. They didn't quite tell me to disappear, but the implication was clear: don't make noise, don't ask questions, don't become a problem. I called Kellen. His number was disconnected. I tried reaching Sloan through her last known command. I was told no such person was assigned there. I sent emails that bounced back as undeliverable. It was surgical, the way they erased us. Not just me, everyone who'd been part of Unit 777. We were scattered, silenced, and separated so thoroughly that even finding each other became impossible. The worst part wasn't the anger. Anger I could handle. Anger had kept me alive in worse situations than a bureaucratic betrayal. The worst part was the absence. I'd spent 11 years in the Air Force. 11 years building a career, earning trust, leading missions that mattered. I'd been decorated twice, promoted ahead of schedule, trusted with operations that most officers would never know existed. And then, nothing. No phone calls. No job offers. No opportunities to transition to another unit or another role. Just a vague suggestion that maybe I should consider early retirement, take some time to decompress and reflect. I didn't retire. I went on terminal leave instead, using up accumulated vacation time while I figured out what to do next. I moved to a rental house in New Mexico, desert, isolation, cheap rent. I spent 6 months applying for contractor positions, government jobs, anything that might use my skill set. Every application hit the same wall. My service record was incomplete. My clearances were suspended. My references either didn't respond or gave carefully neutral answers that killed any chance of an offer. I was being blacklisted. Quietly, professionally, but unmistakably. By month 8, I stopped applying. I took a job teaching self-defense classes at a community center, worked some private security gigs, tried to build something that resembled a normal life. It didn't work. You can't spend a decade operating at the edge of what's legal and necessary, can't lead people through situations where the margin for error is measured in heartbeats, and then just switch it off. The skills don't disappear. The instincts don't fade. I'd wake up at 0400 hours, still running mission scenarios in my head. I'd catch myself scanning faces in grocery stores, looking for threats that weren't there. I'd hear a helicopter overhead and feel my pulse spike, reaching for equipment I no longer carried. I was a soldier without a war, an operator without a mission, a commander whose unit had been erased from history. And the whole time, I kept thinking about the 3 people who didn't come home. Their families had been told they died in a training accident. That was the official story. No details, no specifics, just a flag and a folded notification letter and the thanks of a grateful nation. I wanted to call those families. I wanted to tell them the truth, that their sons, their husbands, their brothers had died doing something that mattered, in a place that mattered, for reasons that were real and urgent. But I couldn't. Because Unit 777 never existed. The mission never happened. And I was nobody. Just another veteran with a gap in her resume and a story she couldn't tell. I was 22 when I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force, fresh out of the academy with a degree in international relations and a head full of idealism. I thought I understood service. I thought I knew what leadership meant. I didn't know anything. My first assignment was intelligence analysis at Langley, long hours in windowless rooms, reading reports, building target packages, learning to see patterns in chaos. It was tedious work, but it taught me how to think 3 steps ahead, how to question assumptions, how to verify everything. By year 3, I was running briefings for field operations. By year 5, I deployed twice and earned my captain's bars. That's when I met Rafe Kellen. He was Army then, a young lieutenant assigned to a joint task force I was supporting in Afghanistan. I was coordinating air assets. He was running ground reconnaissance. We ended up in the same operations center for 6 weeks, working 18-hour days, learning to read each other's shorthand. He was good. Calm under pressure, quick to adapt, completely uninterested in ego or politics. When something needed doing, he did it. When he didn't know something, he asked. When he made a mistake, and everyone makes mistakes in combat, he owned it and moved on. We stayed in touch after that deployment. The military's smaller than people think, especially at the operational level. We'd cross paths at training exercises, interagency briefings, promotion ceremonies. We'd grab coffee when we were in the same city, trade stories about incompetent leadership and brilliant NCOs, complain about the paperwork that seemed to multiply faster than we could complete it. When I made major at 33, younger than average, fast-tracked through intelligence and special programs, Kellen sent me a bottle of whiskey with a note. Don't let it go to your head. You still can't read a map. He was wrong about the map reading, but I appreciated the sentiment. By then, I'd moved into special reconnaissance programs, the kind of assignments that required additional clearances and psych evaluations. I was running mixed teams on operations that combined signals intelligence with human intelligence, coordinating between agencies that didn't always trust each other. I was good at it. Better than I'd expected to be. Leadership, I'd learned, isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about hiring people smarter than you and getting out of their way. It's about making decisions with incomplete information and accepting that some of those decisions will be wrong. It's about taking responsibility when things go bad and deflecting credit when they go right. Unit 777 was created when I was 34. The official designation was meaningless, just a random number assigned to a compartmented special access program. What mattered was the mission: conduct deep cover reconnaissance and target verification in regions where official U.S. military presence would create diplomatic complications. I was offered command. It was the kind of opportunity that comes once in a career, if you're lucky. Full operational authority, hand-picked team, access to resources most commanders only dream about. The catch was the risk. If something went wrong, there would be no backup, no extraction, no acknowledgement. We'd be on our own. I took it. I requested Kellen as my operations XO. By then he was a captain, still Army, but with enough joint operations experience that the cross-branch assignment made sense. He accepted without hesitation. Somebody needs to keep you from getting lost, he said. We spent 3 months building the team. We pulled from everywhere. 2 Rangers, a SEAL, 3 Marine Recon, for Air Force Special Operations, 2 Navy intelligence analysts. We looked for specific qualities: adaptability, emotional stability, ability to operate independently, comfort with ambiguity, and trust. Above everything else, trust. Because in the kind of operations we ran, you couldn't second-guess your teammates. You couldn't worry that someone might panic, might freeze, might make a decision that got everyone killed. You had to know absolutely, completely, that the person next to you would do the job, no matter what. We called ourselves Valkyries informally. The call sign stuck. I became Valkyrie Actual. Kellen was Valkyrie 6. The mythology was fitting. Valkyries chose who lived and who died on the battlefield. We weren't that dramatic, but we did decide which targets got hit and which got ignored. We confirmed intelligence that led to strikes. We gathered evidence that justified operations. We were good at it. Our first mission was verification of a weapons cache in a border region I still can't name. Intelligence suggested a terrorist cell was stockpiling explosives for an attack on a U.S. embassy. Our job was to confirm the location, photograph the materials, and get out without being detected. We went in with 4 people. Kellen led the ground team. I ran coordination from a forward operations post 20 miles away. We had 72 hours. They did it in 48. The strike happened 6 days later. Embassy attack prevented. 0 American casualties. Unit 777 never mentioned in any report. That was the template: invisible success. Over 3 years, we ran 27 missions. Not all of them worked perfectly. We had close calls, near misses, situations that went sideways and required improvisation. But we adapted. We learned. We got better. The team bonded in ways I'd never experienced before. When you're operating that deep, that disconnected from conventional support, you become a family. Not in the sentimental sense. We weren't sitting around campfires sharing feelings. But in the functional sense. You know each other's rhythms, anticipate each other's moves, develop shorthand that makes communication faster than words. Kellen and I could run an operation with minimal verbal coordination. I'd send him grid coordinates and a timeline. He'd acknowledge with a single word and execute flawlessly. When he needed air support, I'd have assets overhead before he finished the request. When I needed ground truth on intelligence reports, he'd have boots on site within hours. It worked because we trusted each other completely. That's what made the betrayal so devastating. Not the institutional betrayal, though that hurt, but the fact that 3 years of trust, 3 years of shared missions and close calls and successful operations could be erased with a single decision from someone who'd never met any of us. General Levin had never deployed with Unit 777. He'd never sat in an operations center watching our team move through hostile territory. He'd never made the impossible decisions we made every day about risk and necessity and acceptable losses. But he had the authority to erase us. And he did. After the storage room meeting, I spent days trying to reach my team. Every number disconnected, every email bounced, every contact severed. It was like they'd never existed. I knew they were alive, some of them anyway. The 3 we lost in the mission had families who'd been notified. But the others? Scattered and silenced. I thought about Kellen constantly. His leg had been badly damaged in the extraction. Had he recovered? Was he still in the army? Was he angry, bitter, relieved to be out? I'd never know. That was the cruelest part of the erasure. Not just losing my career, but losing the people who'd defined it. The operators I'd led through 3 years of impossible missions. The soldiers who'd trusted me with their lives and never once hesitated. They became ghosts, just like me. And Unit 777, the call sign, the mission, the legacy, became nothing more than a classified footnote in files that nobody would ever read. Except it wasn't nothing to me. It was everything. And eventually, I decided to walk back through the gate anyway. The silence in my car felt heavier than it should. I'd parked in the visitor lot outside the operations building, engine off, hands still gripping the wheel. Through the windshield, I could see junior officers moving between buildings, enlisted personnel heading to afternoon formations, the ordinary rhythms of a functioning base. None of them knew who I was. That used to bother me. In the early months after everything collapsed, I'd felt erased in a way that went beyond bureaucracy. It was existential. I'd spent over a decade building a career, earning respect, making decisions that saved lives and ended others. Then suddenly, I was invisible. Now, sitting in that parking lot, the invisibility felt different. Not like erasure. Like camouflage. I'd spent 2 years learning how to be nobody. Learning to move through civilian spaces without the bearing that marks military personnel. Learning to answer, "What do you do?" with vague responses that shut down follow-up questions. Learning to watch the news and see operations I might have run, described in careful passive voice that never named the units involved. I'd learned patience. The Air Force teaches tactical patience. Wait for the right moment. Don't move until conditions favor success, except that sometimes the best action is no action. But this was different. This was strategic patience. The kind that doesn't measure time in hours or days, but in seasons and years. I'd waited 2 years for the moment when I could walk back through that gate. Not because I was angry. Anger burns out. Not because I wanted revenge. Revenge is a luxury that soldiers can't afford. I came back because the mission wasn't finished. Unit 777 had been erased, but the work it did still mattered. The intelligence networks we'd built, the relationships we'd cultivated, the patterns we'd identified, all of that still existed, filed away in classified databases that the current generation of analysts didn't know how to access. They were fighting with incomplete information, making decisions based on data that was 2 years out of date, running operations in regions where we'd already mapped the terrain, identified the players, understood the dynamics. And people were dying because of it. I couldn't prove that. I couldn't point to specific casualties and say, this death happened because they ignored our intel. But I knew the shape of the problem. I'd seen enough operations to recognize when something was going wrong for preventable reasons. So I came back. Not to reclaim my career, that was gone, and I'd made peace with it. But to offer what I knew to people who needed it. Whether they'd listen was another question. I got out of the car. The afternoon sun was sharp and clean, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I straightened my jacket, checked my ID one more time, and walked toward the building. The briefing room was exactly where I'd left it. 3rd floor, East Wing, overlooking the flight line. I could hear voices through the door, Colonel Brenner's, mostly, with occasional interjections from others. They were discussing operational timelines in some theater I couldn't quite identify from context. I waited until Brenner finished a sentence. Then I opened the door and walked in. The reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Confusion, irritation, the beginning of an order to leave. Then the security terminal flashed red, and everything changed. Active authorization, Valkyrie, Unit 777. The young major who'd scanned my card stared at the screen like it had personally insulted him. Colonel Brenner's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, recognition, something that might have been anger or might have been fear. "Major Hale," he said slowly. The rank was automatic, pulled from whatever records the system had displayed. "I thought you were gone." I pulled out the empty chair and sat. I was. I'm back. The others around the table were doing quick mental calculations. A major who could trigger Unit 777 authorization wasn't just any major. The fact that I was in civilian clothes made it worse, suggested I was operating outside normal chains of command. "This briefing is classified," Brenner said. He was trying to reassert control, but his voice had lost its edge. "I know," I said. "You're discussing operational readiness in the Horn of Africa. Specifically, you're trying to verify intelligence about a weapon smuggling network operating out of a port city that you can't name because acknowledging our interest would complicate diplomatic relationships." The room went very still. "How do you?" Brenner started. "Because Unit 777 ran that network 2 years ago. We identified 17 key nodes, mapped the financial flows, and verified 3 separate weapons caches. The intel's in the system, compartmented under special access codes. But you don't have those codes, so you're starting from scratch." I pulled a tablet from my bag, my personal device, nothing classified on it, and opened a document I'd prepared before coming. Just an outline, nothing detailed enough to violate security protocols. "Your current intelligence suggests the network operates out of 4 locations. It's actually 7. You're focusing on the port facilities. The real choke point is a warehouse complex 15 miles inland. And the person you think is running the operation? He's middle management. The actual decision maker is someone you haven't identified yet. Brenner leaned forward. If you have actionable intelligence, Major, you need to submit it through proper channels. I tried that, I said. 2 years ago. Right before Unit 777 was disbanded and everyone who'd worked on this was scattered across different commands. The intel's been sitting in a classified database ever since, inaccessible to anyone who doesn't have the right clearances. And you do. I gestured at the security terminal, still glowing red. Apparently. One of the other officers spoke up, a lieutenant colonel I didn't recognize, older than Brenner, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent real time downrange. Why come back now? It was a fair question. Because the mission matters more than the institution, I said. Unit 777 was erased for political reasons. Fine. I understand that. But the work we did was real. The intelligence we gathered didn't stop being relevant just because the unit disbanded. And if that intelligence can prevent casualties, prevent mission failures, prevent another operation from going sideways the way ours did, I stopped. Took a breath. Kept my voice level. Then it needs to be used. Brenner was watching me carefully. You're asking for operational access. I'm offering expertise, I corrected. What you do with it is your decision. The lieutenant colonel spoke again. The brass won't like this. Bringing back someone from a disbanded unit, especially one that was shut down under contentious circumstances, the brass don't need to know, I said. You need intelligence. I have it. We can make this work through unofficial channels, if that's what it takes. Brenner shook his head. I don't run operations unofficially, Major. If you want to contribute, we do this by the book. I respected that. I didn't agree with it, but I respected it. Then submit a request, I said. Request that I be brought on as a technical advisor for operations in regions where Unit 777 had prior operational knowledge. Use whatever administrative justification you need. But do it fast, because your current timeline shows you're planning to move on that weapons network in 3 weeks, and with the intel you have now, you're going to miss the primary target. I stood up, left the tablet on the table. My contact information's in the system. When you're ready to talk, call me. I walked out before anyone could respond. Behind me, I heard voices rising, arguments starting. Good. Let them fight about it. Let them argue about protocols and proper channels and what the brass would say. Eventually, they'd realize I was right. And then they'd call. The call came 3 days later. I was running when my phone buzzed, early morning, desert trail outside Santa Fe, trying to burn off the restless energy that came with waiting. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the area code. Northern Virginia. Pentagon Corridor. I let it go to voicemail, finished the last mile, then listened to the message while stretching against my truck. Major Hale, this is Colonel Brenner. We need to talk. Call me back at this number. Soon. I waited an hour before calling. Let him wonder if I'd respond at all. He picked up on the second ring. You were right, he said without preamble. About the weapons network. We cross-referenced your information with current reporting. There's overlap we'd missed. I know. We'd like you to come in. Officially. As a technical consultant on regional operations. What's the paperwork situation? Being processed. You'll need to undergo a clearance review, but given your existing authorizations, it should be expedited. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I did the math. Your operation timeline is 3 weeks. By the time the paperwork clears, you'll have already moved. Silence on the other end. Then, we're considering adjusting the timeline. That surprised me. Military operations don't delay easily. Too many moving parts, too many coordinated elements. Pushing a timeline meant convincing multiple layers of command that the delay was worth it. You're taking this seriously, I said. The lieutenant colonel you met, Harris, he served in the Horn 10 years ago. He ran some of the same networks you're talking about. When you mentioned the warehouse complex, he knew exactly which location you meant. He's vouching for your credibility. Small world. Small military. Tell Harris I appreciate it. Can you make it work? 3 weeks. I considered. 3 weeks to get clearances restored, get access to the systems I needed, bring current analysts up to speed on intelligence that was 2 years old but still relevant. It was tight, but possible. I can make it work, I said. But I'll need interim access. Can't wait for full clearance restoration if you want me to be useful. I'll see what I can do. He called back 6 hours later. I had temporary access to classified systems, limited to the specific operation we'd discussed. It was a compromise enough to let me work, not enough to make the bureaucracy nervous. Good enough. I flew to DC the next morning. The operations center was in a facility I'd never worked out of, new construction, built since my time. Modern, clean, full of young analysts who'd never heard of Unit 777. I set up in a spare office, logged into the classified network, and started pulling files. The first thing I did was map the current intelligence picture against what we'd developed 2 years ago. Unit 777 had built a comprehensive network analysis, tracking money flows, personnel movements, communications patterns. Most of that intel was still valid. Some of it needed updating. People move, relationships change, organizations evolve. But the underlying structure was the same. I spent 2 days building briefing materials. Not everything Unit 777 had gathered. Some of that was too classified, too compartmented, but enough to give the current team context they were missing. On day 3, I presented to Brenner's team. There were 12 people in the room this time, including Harris and several analysts I hadn't met before. I walked them through the network structure, explained how the weapons smuggling operation fit into a larger criminal political ecosystem, identified which nodes were critical and which were just noise. They asked good questions. Smart questions. These weren't bureaucrats protecting turf. They were professionals trying to solve a real problem. When I finished, Harris leaned back in his chair. This changes the target package significantly. It should, I said. You were planning to hit the port facilities. That'll disrupt operations for a week, maybe 2. But the warehouse complex is where they store everything before distribution. Hit that, and you collapse the entire Western distribution network. What about civilian casualties? One of the analysts asked. The warehouse complex is in a populated area. It is now, I agreed. 2 years ago, it was industrial zone, mostly empty at night. If that's changed, you'll need to adjust approach timing. But the location is still the choke point. We spent 3 hours wargaming scenarios. By the end, Brenner had enough to take back to his command. The operation would be delayed 2 weeks while they rebuilt the target package. Not ideal, but better than hitting the wrong target. As people filed out, Harris stayed behind. I knew some of the Unit 777 people, he said. Not well, but enough to hear stories. Everyone said you were the best operator most of them had ever worked with. I didn't know what to say to that. I had a good team. What happened? I mean, I know officially it was disbanded. But unofficially, I said, we succeeded too well. Ran an operation that worked perfectly from a tactical perspective, but was politically inconvenient. So they erased us to avoid questions. Harris nodded slowly. That's what I figured. Happens more than people want to admit. He left. I sat in the empty briefing room for a while, staring at maps that showed a region I'd once known better than my hometown. The work felt good. Not emotionally good. It wasn't about redemption or vindication. Just functionally good. Using skills that had been idle for 2 years. Solving problems that mattered. But it wasn't enough. Advising on one operation, even an important one, wasn't the same as what Unit 777 had been. We'd been a persistent presence, building institutional knowledge over years. One briefing, one successful operation, wouldn't rebuild that. I needed something more sustainable. That's when I started making calls. Not official calls, I didn't have the authority for that. But I'd spent 11 years in the military, 3 years running Unit 777. I knew people. People who owed me favors, people who respected the work, people who understood what we'd accomplished and what had been lost when the unit was disbanded. I called a colonel I'd worked with in Afghanistan, now stationed at Fort Bragg. I called a Navy commander who'd coordinated with Unit 777 on maritime interdiction operations. I called a CIA operations officer who'd used our intelligence for 3 separate successful missions. I didn't ask for anything specific. I just reminded them I existed. Reminded them what Unit 777 had done. Planted seeds. 2 weeks later, my clearance review came back. Full restoration, all compartments, no restrictions. Brenner called me personally. "I don't know how you did that," he said. "Those reviews usually take months, not weeks." "I didn't do anything," I said. Which was technically true. "Well, someone did. You're cleared for permanent advisory status. If you want it." I thought about it. Advisory status meant influence without authority. I could brief operations, provide intelligence, offer recommendations. But I couldn't command. Couldn't build a team. Couldn't run missions. It was more than I'd had a month ago. Less than I needed. "I'll take it," I said. "For now." The Horn of Africa operation launched 3 weeks later, exactly as we'd revised it. The target was the warehouse complex. Timing was adjusted for minimal civilian exposure. The strike was surgical, special operations forces on the ground, close air support overhead, in and out in under an hour. They recovered 14 crates of weapons, destroyed the facility, and captured 6 high-value targets, including the actual network leader I'd identified. 0 U.S. casualties. Mission success. Brenner sent me the after-action report, classified but clear. The operation had worked because of the updated intelligence. Because someone had remembered what Unit 777 knew. I read the report twice, then filed it away. Success felt different now. 2 years ago, a mission like this would have been satisfying in a straightforward way. Problem identified, problem solved, move to the next one. Now it felt complicated. Good, but tinged with everything that had been lost to make it possible. 3 people from Unit 777 were dead. The rest were scattered, silenced, reassigned to roles that didn't use their skills. The unit itself was erased from official records. And I was back, but only partially. Only conditionally. Still, it was something. The day after the operation, I got an email. No subject line, sent from a generic military address I didn't recognize. The message was 3 words, "Well done, Valkyrie." The signature was a number, 777. I stared at that email for a long time. Someone from the old unit was still out there. Still paying attention. Still using the call sign. I wanted to respond. Wanted to ask who it was, where they were, whether they were okay. But operational security ran deeper than nostalgia. If someone from Unit 777 was reaching out this carefully, this anonymously, they had reasons. So I deleted the email and didn't reply. But I kept working. Over the next month, I advised on 3 more operations. Each one benefited from Unit 777's historical intelligence. Each one succeeded in ways that wouldn't have been possible without that context. Word spread quietly through the special operations community. There was a technical advisor at Peterson with deep knowledge of regions that were becoming operational priorities. Someone who understood networks in ways that current analysts didn't. Someone who got results. People started calling me directly. Not through Brenner, not through official channels. Just quiet requests. "I heard you know about such and such region. Can we talk?" I always said yes. By month 3, I was working with 5 different commands. By month 6, I had more requests than I could handle alone. I was operating like Unit 777 had, advising multiple simultaneous operations, coordinating intelligence across agencies that didn't always communicate well, filling gaps in institutional knowledge that came from disbanding experienced units. It was exhausting. It was exactly what I'd been trained to do. And it wasn't sustainable. One person couldn't replace an entire operational unit. I needed help. I needed people who understood the work the way Unit 777 had understood it. People who could think strategically, operate independently, build networks instead of just targeting individuals. I needed my team back. But I didn't know where they were. Didn't know if they'd even want to return to this kind of work. 2 years was a long time. People moved on. Found new careers, new identities, new lives that didn't involve classified operations and institutional betrayal. Still, I had to try. I started pulling service records carefully, using access that was technically legitimate but ethically questionable. I wasn't supposed to be tracking down former Unit 777 personnel, but I wasn't specifically forbidden from it either. Gray area. I lived there. It took weeks, but I found fragments. Transfer orders, promotion records, assignment histories. Enough to piece together where people had ended up. Captain Kellen was at Fort Campbell. Still Army, still operational, assigned to a training battalion. His leg injury had healed enough for him to return to duty, but not enough for him to return to field operations. He was teaching other officers how to do the job he couldn't do anymore. That hurt to read. Major Sloan was at Hurlburt Field, working intelligence support for Air Force Special Operations Command. Good assignment, important work. But she'd been a field analyst with Unit 777, running operations from forward positions. Now she was behind a desk. Chief Rowe was at Ramstein in Germany, technical advisory role. Sergeant Diaz was at Coronado, instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Lieutenant Park was at Quantico. All of them alive. All of them working. All of them doing jobs that were several steps removed from what they'd done with Unit 777. I made a decision that I knew might be a mistake. I started sending emails. Nothing official, nothing that would trigger security reviews. Just brief messages. This is Valkyrie. I'm at Peterson. If you're ever in the area, let's get coffee. I didn't expect responses. Didn't know if the addresses were even monitored. Some of the accounts might have been shut down or reassigned. But 3 days later, I got a reply from Kellen. Coffee sounds good. I'll be in Colorado next month for a conference. Name the place. I read that email 6 times, analyzing the tone, the word choice, looking for subtext. Was he angry? Relieved? Just being polite? No way to know without asking. So I named a place. A quiet cafe off base, civilian enough to avoid attention. And I waited to see if he'd actually show up. Kellen walked into the cafe exactly on time, which didn't surprise me. He'd always been precise about timing, not obsessive, just professional. In combat, 5 minutes early means you control the space. 5 minutes late means someone else does. He looked different. Older, obviously, 2 years does that. But something else had changed. The easy confidence I remembered had been replaced by something more guarded. He scanned the room before finding me in the corner booth, and his gait favored his right leg just slightly. I stood. We shook hands. It felt formal, wrong. You look good, he said. You're a terrible liar, I replied. That got a smile. Small, but real. We sat. The waitress came by. We both ordered coffee black. Some habits don't change. How's the leg? I asked when she left. Functional. Hurts when it rains. I can run 3 miles before it starts complaining. Could be worse. Could be better. He shrugged. I'm alive. That's more than some people got. The words hung there, heavy with names we couldn't say in public. 3 teammates who didn't come home. The mission that ended everything. I tried to reach you, I said. After the debrief. After Levin shut us down. Your number was disconnected. They reassigned me within 48 hours. New unit, new location, new phone. I tried to reach you too. Got nothing but bounced emails. Same. They were thorough. They were scared, Kellen said. The mission went bad in ways that would have raised congressional questions. Easier to scatter everyone than to answer those questions. The waitress brought coffee. We both drank, grateful for something to do with our hands. Why'd you reach out? Kellen asked. After 2 years, why now? I told him. About walking back through the gate, about advising on operations, about pulling intel from Unit 777's old files. About realizing that one person couldn't replace what we'd built as a team. He listened without interrupting, which was another thing I'd forgotten about him. Most officers feel compelled to fill silence with commentary. Kellen just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You want to rebuild it, he said finally. That's what this is about. Not rebuild. Resurrect. There's a difference. Explain. Rebuild means starting over. New unit, new designation, new mission parameters. Resurrect means taking what existed and bringing it back to life. Same principles, same operational philosophy. Just adapted. Under what authority? Advisory cell. Black budget, off the books. We wouldn't be running missions directly, we'd be supporting them. Providing intelligence, coordinating assets, filling gaps in institutional knowledge. Kellen leaned back, studying me. That's not what Unit 777 was. No, I agreed. But it's what we can be now. The world didn't stop needing what we did just because the Pentagon got nervous about congressional oversight. And they'd let us? After shutting us down specifically to avoid scrutiny. They don't have to let us. They just have to not stop us. There's always space in the military for people who solve problems quietly. We'd be contractors, technically. Advisors. Nobody has to acknowledge what we used to be. He thought about that. I could see him working through the logistics, the risks, the potential outcomes. That was Kellen, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Who else have you contacted? He asked. Just you. I found service records for the others, but I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because you are my XO. Because I trust your judgment. And because if you tell me this is a bad idea, I'll believe you. He smiled at that, but there was sadness in it. You're asking me to give up a stable career. Teaching is good work. Important work. I'm helping the next generation learn from our mistakes. I know. But you're teaching because you can't operate anymore. Not really. Not the way you want to. And I know what that does to someone like you. His jaw tightened. I'd hit something true. The leg's fine, he said. The leg's functional, I corrected. There's a difference. You can teach. You can advise. You can do 1,000 things that matter. But you can't be downrange running operations, and that's what you're built for. And your proposal would be different how? Because we'd be operational without being operational. Running coordination from secure facilities, advising teams in the field, building networks instead of kicking down doors. It's not the same as what we did. But it's closer than what you're doing now. He drank his coffee thinking. Outside the window, traffic moved past. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that 2 former covert operators were sitting in a cafe discussing whether to resurrect a disbanded military unit. Sloan would be interested, Kellen said finally. She's been pushing paperwork at Hurlburt for 18 months. I ran into her at a conference last year. She asked about you. What did you say? That I didn't know. Nobody knew. You'd vanished. I was learning how to be invisible. You were always good at that. I smiled despite myself. What about the others? Rose in Germany, you said? He'd come back. That man lives for operational work. Anything else is just marking time. Diaz. I don't know. Teaching suits him. He might be happy where he is. And you? Kellen was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought he might say no. Might tell me he'd moved on, built a new life, didn't want to resurrect old ghosts. I need to think about it, he said finally. This isn't a decision I can make over coffee. Fair. But I'm not saying no. That was more than I'd hoped for. We talked for another hour. Not about the proposal, just about life. Where we'd been, what we'd seen, how we'd survived the last 2 years. It was the kind of conversation you can only have with someone who understands what it means to be erased by the institution you served. When we left, Kellen shook my hand again. Still formal, but warmer. I'll call you in a week, he said. One way or the other. No pressure, I said. If you say no, I'll understand. He nodded, started to walk away, then turned back. Major? One thing. Yeah. If we do this, if I say yes and we bring the others back, we do it right. No cutting corners, no unofficial operations that could blow back on the team. We almost died because leadership threw us under the bus once. I won't let that happen again. Agreed, I said. We build protections first, operations second. He seemed satisfied with that. He walked to his car with that slight limp, got in, drove away. I sat in my truck for a while, thinking. Recruiting the team was one thing. Building the infrastructure to protect them was another. I needed official authorization, even if it was buried in classified annexes that nobody would ever read. I needed funding that couldn't be traced directly to Unit 777. I needed command relationships that gave us autonomy without isolation. I needed allies. Over the next week, I made more calls. Colonels I'd worked with. Intelligence officers who owed me favors. People who understood that sometimes the best way to support national security was to work around official channels. Most of them listened politely and said no. Some said maybe. A few said yes. By the end of the week, I had the outline of something that might work. Not Unit 777 exactly. That designation was dead and buried. But a new entity. An advisory cell attached to Special Operations Command, funded through a discretionary intelligence budget, staffed by contractors with specialized regional knowledge, all of whom just happened to be former Unit 777 personnel. It was bureaucratic camouflage. A way to resurrect the team without officially acknowledging what we'd been. Kellen called on day 8. "I'm in," he said. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "We protect the team first. Mission second. If something goes wrong, we don't let anyone throw us under the bus again." "Agreed. And we do this legitimately. I'm done with operations that exist in legal gray areas. If we can't do it with proper authorization, we don't do it." "Agreed. Then let's talk about how this actually works." We talked for 2 hours. By the end, we had a plan. Step 1. Secure official authorization. Step 2. Recruit the rest of the team. Step 3. Establish operational protocols that protected everyone involved. Step 4. Start solving problems nobody else could solve. It would take months, maybe longer. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was moving toward something instead of away from something. Unit 777 was dead, but Valkyrie wasn't. The official authorization came through in a form I didn't expect, a 3-page memo from the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, buried in a classified annex to the annual intelligence budget. It authorized the creation of a regional advisory cell to provide specialized expertise on operations in areas where conventional intelligence infrastructure was limited. No mention of Unit 777. No mention of me by name. Just authorization for a small team of contractors to provide advisory services to Special Operations Command. It was perfect. Colonel Harris, the officer who'd vouched for me during the first briefing, helped push it through. He'd spent enough time in the Pentagon to understand how bureaucracy works. You don't ask for what you actually want. You ask for something anodyne that happens to enable what you want. "Congratulations," he said when he forwarded me the memo. "You now officially exist as a consultant. What you do with that is your business." I started recruiting immediately. Kellen was first. He submitted retirement paperwork from the Army, early, but acceptable given his injury status, and signed on as a contractor within 2 weeks. His official title was Operations Coordination Specialist. His actual job was being my second-in-command, same as before. Major Sloan was next. She'd been looking for an exit from Hurlburt anyway. The intelligence work there was important but repetitive. When I explained what we were building, she didn't hesitate. "I'm in," she said. "When do I start?" Chief Rowe took longer to convince. He had a good position in Germany, solid benefits, and he was close to retirement with full pension. Leaving meant taking a contractor salary with no guarantee the work would last. But he also knew what we'd accomplished with Unit 777 and what had been lost when it disbanded. "You're rebuilding the team," he said when I finally reached him by phone. It wasn't a question. "Trying to. Does Kellen know?" "He's already signed on." Rowe was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm in too. When do you need me?" Within 3 months, I had 6 people, me, Kellen, Sloan, Rowe, and 2 others from the original unit who'd been languishing in administrative roles. Not the full 14 we'd had before, but enough to start. We set up operations in a secure facility at Peterson, tucked into a building that housed a dozen other obscure programs. 3 offices, a briefing room, and access to classified networks. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The first month was administrative hell. Security clearances had to be updated, contracts had to be negotiated, workspaces had to be set up. We spent more time filling out paperwork than doing actual intelligence work. But slowly, it came together. We started by cataloging what we knew. Unit 777 had built extensive files on networks in 3 regions: the Horn of Africa, the Middle East Central Asia border areas, and parts of Southeast Asia. Most of that intelligence was 2 years old, but the underlying structures were still valid. Sloan took the lead on updating the files. She reached out to current analysts, cross-referenced our old data with new reporting, and identified gaps where our historical knowledge could add value. "We're not operators anymore," she said during one of our early planning sessions. "We're institutional memory. The people running missions now don't know what we knew. Our job is to make sure they don't have to learn it the hard way." That became our operational philosophy: prevent others from making mistakes we'd already made. We started small. A lieutenant colonel planning an operation in Yemen reached out because he'd heard we had experience in the region. We spent 3 hours with him, walking through network relationships that weren't visible in current intelligence reports. "This changes everything," he said when we finished. "How did nobody tell me this before?" "Because the unit that knew it was disbanded," Kellen said. "And the files were classified in ways that made them hard to find." The operation succeeded. Word spread. Another request came in, then another. Within 6 months, we were supporting operations across 4 different theaters. We weren't running missions, that wasn't our role anymore. But we were enabling them, providing context that made success more likely and catastrophic failures less so. It felt good. Not the same as Unit 777 had felt. We weren't downrange, weren't making split-second decisions with lives on the line. But we were contributing. We were using skills that had been dormant. We were relevant again. More importantly, we were protected. The bureaucratic structure we'd built meant that if something went wrong, we had official authorization to point to. We weren't operating in legal gray areas anymore. We were contractors doing exactly what our contracts specified. That mattered to Kellen especially. He'd insisted on proper authorization, and I delivered it. It meant he could trust that we wouldn't be abandoned again if things got complicated. The team dynamic settled into something familiar but different. We'd worked together for years in Unit 777, built shorthand and trust that didn't require constant communication. But 2 years apart had changed us. Kellen was more cautious, more insistent on documentation and official approvals. Sloan was sharper, more willing to push back when she thought I was wrong. Ro had always been unflappable, and that hadn't changed, but he moved slower now, like he was conserving energy for when it really mattered. We weren't the same team we'd been, but we were still a team. For months into operations, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Colonel Brenner. He'd been promoted since I'd first walked into his briefing room, full-bird colonel now, with broader responsibilities. He wanted to meet in person. We met at the same cafe where I'd talked to Kellen. Neutral ground, off base. Brenner didn't waste time. "I'm hearing good things about your advisory cell. Multiple commands have told me you're providing intelligence that's changing how they approach operations." "That's the job," I said. "It's more than that. You're filling a gap that's been open since Unit 777 was disbanded. People are noticing." I waited. There was more coming. "There's been discussion at higher levels," Brenner continued, "about formalizing what you're doing, bringing your cell officially under SOCOM. More funding, more staff, more authority. More oversight," I added. He nodded. "That too." I thought about it. More resources would let us do more. We were already stretched thin, supporting more operations than 6 people could comfortably handle. Additional staff would help. But more oversight meant more risk. Meant more people asking questions about who we were and what we'd been. Meant potentially exposing the fact that we were essentially Unit 777 operating under a different name. "I need to talk to my team," I said. "Of course." "But Major? People are starting to remember what Unit 777 accomplished. There's appetite for bringing that capability back in a more permanent form." After Brenner left, I sat in the cafe for a long time, thinking. We'd spent months building something that worked. A small team, operating quietly, supporting missions without drawing attention. It was sustainable. It was safe. Expanding would mean risking all of that. But it would also mean doing more good. Helping more operations. Preventing more failures. That night, I called a team meeting. We gathered in the secure briefing room. I laid out what Brenner had proposed: formal integration into SOCOM, more funding, more staff, more missions. "What do you think?" I asked when I finished. Kellen spoke first. We'd lose independence. Right now, we pick which operations to support. If we're officially under SOCOM, they'll task us however they want. True, I said. But we'd also have more impact, Sloan added. We're turning away requests now because we don't have capacity. More staff means we can say yes more often. More staff also means more risk, Rowe pointed out. Right now, we're small enough to fly under the radar. We get bigger, people start asking who we are and where we came from. They're already asking, I said. Brenner mentioned that people are remembering Unit 777. We can't stay invisible forever. The discussion went on for 2 hours. Everyone had opinions. Nobody agreed completely. Finally, Kellen leaned back in his chair. This is your call, Major. We'll support whatever you decide. I looked around the room. 6 people who'd trusted me before, who'd been betrayed alongside me, who'd come back anyway because they believed the mission mattered. We expand, I said. Carefully. We maintain operational security. We build protections before we take on more work. But we don't stay small just because it's safe. We got back into this to make a difference. Let's make it. Heads nodded around the table. Unit 777 was still dead. But something new was being born. The expansion took 6 months. Not because the work was complicated, but because we insisted on doing it right. Every new hire went through extensive vetting. Every contract was reviewed by military lawyers to ensure we had proper authorization. Every operational procedure was documented, approved, and filed in ways that would protect the team if questions came up later. We grew from 6 people to 15, then 20, then 25. We weren't Unit 777 anymore, not officially. We were the Regional Advisory Cell, a contractor team supporting Special Operations Command. But the people we hired knew what we really were. Most of them were former special operators themselves, people who understood the mission and the risks. A few were former Unit 777 members. Lieutenant Park joined from Quantico. Sergeant Diaz eventually left his teaching position and signed on. One by one, pieces of the original team came back together. Not everyone, some had moved on completely, built civilian lives, found peace in careers that didn't involve classified operations. I didn't push them. But the ones who came back brought something irreplaceable. They remembered. They knew how we'd worked, what we'd accomplished, what we'd lost. They didn't need to be trained on our operational philosophy because they'd lived it. With more people came more capabilities. We established regional teams, each focusing on a specific theater. Sloan ran Middle East operations. Kellen coordinated everything, same as he'd done before. Rowe built out our technical infrastructure, creating secure networks that let us share intelligence across multiple classification levels. I focused on command relationships. That was the key to survival, making sure that the people who could shut us down didn't want to. I briefed generals, coordinated with agency heads, built connections across the interagency community. Politics, essentially. The part of military leadership that nobody talks about but everyone does. I was good at it. Better than I'd expected. Part of it was experience. I'd been running operations long enough to understand how decisions got made at higher levels. But part of it was something else. I'd been erased once. I knew what it looked like when an institution decided you were inconvenient. I could recognize the warning signs and navigate around them. We made ourselves indispensable. That was the strategy. Support so many operations successfully that shutting us down would raise more questions than keeping us open. It worked. By the end of the first year, we were supporting operations in 7 theaters. By year 2, that expanded to 11. We advised on everything from hostage rescues to counter-proliferation missions to long-term network disruption campaigns. And we were succeeding. Not perfectly, no operation succeeds perfectly. But consistently. Missions we advised on had better intelligence, clearer objectives, fewer surprises. Casualty rates were lower. Success rates were higher. The metrics spoke for themselves. Young officers started seeking us out for mentorship. They'd heard stories about Unit 777, not officially, but the military's informal network is powerful. They knew we'd done something important that had been erased. They wanted to learn from people who'd operated at that level. I was careful about that. We couldn't advertise what we'd been. But we could teach what we knew. I started running informal training sessions. Nothing official, just small groups of junior officers who wanted to learn about network analysis, operational planning, cross-agency coordination. The skills that made Unit 777 effective. One session stays with me. A young captain, Air Force, intelligence officer, maybe 28, asked a question that stopped me cold. "Ma'am, everyone says you ran the most successful covert unit in recent history. But nobody will tell me what happened to it. Why was it disbanded?" The room went quiet. 15 officers, all waiting to hear what I'd say. I could have deflected. Could have cited classification, said I couldn't discuss it, moved on to the next topic. Instead, I told the truth. We ran a mission that worked perfectly from an operational standpoint, I said. But it created political complications. Leadership decided the easiest solution was to pretend the unit never existed. So they scattered us, classified everything, and moved on. That's not fair, someone said. No, I agreed. But fairness isn't the point. The mission is the point. We accomplished what we were asked to accomplish. The fact that it became politically inconvenient afterward doesn't change that. The captain who'd asked the original question leaned forward. So why come back? After being treated like that, why return to do the same work? I'd thought about that question a lot over the past 2 years. Because the work matters more than the institution, I said. The people running operations now need intelligence that we have. They need expertise that took us years to build. If we can prevent casualties, prevent mission failures, prevent other units from being disbanded the way ours was, then it's worth coming back. Even though they might do it again? Erase you again if it becomes convenient. Even then, I said. Because this time, we're building protections. This time, we're operating with official authorization and documented procedures. This time, if someone tries to throw us under the bus, we have options. The room was silent for a moment. Then the captain nodded slowly. I want to work for you someday, ma'am. Then get better at your job, I said. We only hire people who are already excellent. The session continued. But that exchange stayed with me. We were building something more than an operational unit. We were building a legacy. Showing younger officers that you can survive institutional betrayal, that you can come back from being erased, that the mission matters even when the institution fails you. That felt important. 3 months later, I got called to a meeting at the Pentagon. The request came from a general I'd never worked with directly, a 2-star who oversaw multiple special operations commands. I flew to DC, met him in his office. No preliminaries, no small talk. Major Hale, he said, I want you to brief the Joint Chiefs on what your team does. I kept my face neutral. Sir, we're a small contractor team. I'm not sure we're Joint Chiefs material. You're supporting operations in 11 theaters. You've advised on over 200 missions in the past year. Success rates for those missions are statistically significantly higher than baseline. Someone at that level needs to understand what you're doing and how to protect it. Protect it from what? From being disbanded again. You were Unit 777, correct? Or at least you commanded it. There was no point denying it. Yes, sir. Then you know what happens when successful programs get caught in political crossfire. I want to make sure that doesn't happen to your current operation. The best way to do that is to brief people at a level where they can shield you from that kind of pressure. I thought about it. Briefing the Joint Chiefs meant visibility. Visibility meant risk. But it also meant protection if the general was right. When? I asked. 2 weeks. I'll send you the details. I prepared for that briefing like it was a combat mission. Every slide checked, every data point verified, every claim supported by documented evidence. Kellen helped, pushing me to anticipate questions and prepare responses. You're going to be in a room with people who have the authority to shut us down with a single decision, he said. Make sure they understand why they shouldn't. The briefing lasted 90 minutes. 4 members of the Joint Chiefs attended, along with several senior staff officers. I walked them through what we did, how we did it, and what results we'd achieved. They asked hard questions. I gave direct answers. At the end, the chairman, a 4-star general with more combat experience than everyone else in the room combined, leaned back in his chair. Major, why didn't anyone tell me about this before? Because we've been deliberately low profile, sir. We're rebuilding something that was disbanded under contentious circumstances. We wanted to prove value before seeking attention. You've proved it. What do you need from us? Continued authorization. Protection if there's political pressure to shut us down. And honestly, sir, just acknowledgement that what we're doing matters. He nodded. You have all three. Consider this meeting your institutional backing. If someone tries to disband you, they'll have to explain it to me personally. That was more than I'd hoped for. After the meeting, I called Kellen. We're official, I said. The chairman just gave us explicit backing. Does that mean we can stop looking over our shoulders? No. But it means when we look over our shoulders, we'll see friendly forces instead of threats. That night, the team went out for dinner. Off base, civilian restaurant, nothing fancy. Just 25 people who'd survived institutional betrayal and come back anyway. Kellen raised his glass. To Unit 777, he said quietly. The unit that never existed. To Valkyrie, someone else added. We drink. Not to celebration. Just to acknowledgement. We'd done it. We'd rebuilt what was taken from us, piece by piece. We'd survived. We'd come back. And we'd made sure it would last. Here's where I'll leave it. I walked back through that gate, and I didn't ask for permission to exist. If this hit home, tap like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your take in the comments. Your experience might be the intel someone else needs. Questions for you. Have you ever been written off, only to prove you still had the keys? What happened? When an institution or person erases your work, do you rebuild from inside or walk away? What boundary are you enforcing this week, and who will notice first? If you were in my spot at the gate, what would you have said or kept to yourself? What's the quiet when you're claiming after being underestimated?